Ladies and gentlemen, we begin this third hour of the Elias Makos Show, I would say in part by talking about the Canadian dream. Because, when I think about what the Canadian dream is, and I know we've heard about the American dream on and on and on, would home ownership be part of your Canadian dream? And when I think about it, boy, now I don't own a home. I'm renting right now. But yeah, I'd say, I really want to own my own home. That has been a dream on and off over my life. And I think for most people, that is a dream, right? I want to own my own home. I don't think many people dream about living in government housing. I really don't. Maybe I'm wrong, by the way. Maybe your dream is I want to live in social housing and pay a portion of my salary to a government body. Maybe that is your dream. But I really haven't heard that story very much. Now, in the National Post recently, Tasha Kheiriddin penning this piece. Here's the headline. Trudeau doesn't want you to own a home. He wants to be your landlord. Let's now go to Tasha Kheiriddin. You can read her words on her Substack and in the National Post, among other places. Tasha, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Elias. How are you?
So I'm doing great. What do you say here about my opening here, about the Canadian dream? Am I on to something?
No, you are, because Canada has traditionally had very high rates of home ownership, around 70% in some decades, and people have that as an aspiration, right? We are a society where we also think it's not that you have to have an intergenerational home. You can buy your own home. You don't have to get one from your parents. Like in many European countries, the only way to home ownership is if you inherit a family house or you get help. So it's always been that idea of this is a place where you can come from anywhere around the world. Maybe you couldn't have your home there, or you didn't have a home you liked, and here you can go and buy a nice big house in the suburbs and live happily ever after. And that seems to kind of be not the case anymore.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to policy. And I think what you take aim in your piece in the National Post is the Trudeau Liberal housing policy. Why don't you tell our listeners about that policy and why you think it's off base?
Yeah, well, the policy the Liberals are proposing is they want to convert unused public lands and buildings to housing. This is an idea that Conservatives have been talking about, by the way, for a couple of years now. But instead of, as the Conservatives had proposed, is taking this land, selling it, and getting someone to develop it, the Liberals want to lease it to developers so that they can keep ownership of it and, in their words, keep home prices low. So what does that mean? It means that you'll never own the house because the government will essentially, it'll be leasehold, which is a form of, a living arrangement that exists in other places in the world too, but it's kind of like a condo, but even not really. In a condo, you don't own the land, but you own the condo. You have to pay fees all the time, though. Here, it's leasehold. So you have situations in Canada with leasehold. Most commonly, people will think of provincial parks where people have cottages, right? And it's leased land. So they don't own the land. They can build a cottage, but at the end of the day, they're never worth as much as if they actually own the property, right?
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't encourage you to invest in your home if it's a leasehold home, the same way if it would be ownership. And so to me, this is just, they're trying to be different than what the Conservatives are saying, but at the end of the day, it doesn't give you what you want, which is, like you said, owning that home.
And the other thing is I find that every time there's a government level that tries to interject itself in the process and they try and get involved, like in Montreal, there's a program for quote unquote affordable housing, right? So it's a condo that you're buying and it's 10% or 15% below market value. And you buy that. Okay. Someone buys that place and they get quote unquote a deal. Artificially, they get a deal. 3 years later, they sell the place. It goes right back to the market rates. And I just don't see what the benefit of that is, right? So I just find it's like oftentimes they're trying to interject in something that the free market does a pretty good job at. And this is a government, Tasha, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the Trudeau government has spent so much money. They've been throwing money at this problem for a while, yet the cost of housing continues to rise.
Yeah, it does. And it's a supply and demand issue. And they want to aggressively increase the supply, but it's honestly impossible. The millions of homes that would have to be built are not going to be, it's impossible to do in the time frame if you continue to have the demand. And this is the big if. So the demand is coming from where? The demand is coming in part from newcomers that we've let into the country, millions of them, that were, let in with the idea that there was a labor shortage, we need to fill it, opportunities for people to study. And we found out that, in fact, folks are coming here and they can't find a job. They can't find a house. It's just too many people for the available supports socially, so housing, infrastructure, everything else. So, okay, so that means government is now saying, okay, we're going to scale those numbers back, but they're not scaling them back very quickly. They're really not. And in fact, the number of newcomers actually increased. They were supposed to be, I think, 300,000, and now it's actually 4 that have come in the last, it was till April. So, they're not even respecting their own numbers. And that is a problem because it's turning the Canadian consensus against immigration, which is a very dangerous thing. We need immigration. We like immigration. We are an immigration country. When people start getting angry about it, that's when extremists and other people can start, getting their hooks into policy. And that's very dangerous. So I'm really mad at the Liberals. I'm really mad that under their watch, they managed to mess this up.
And they managed to take the country, like maybe in the history of countries, a country that has been so welcoming, open to immigration, and actually change the conversation on immigration. It's actually astounding. With Tasha Kheiriddin, a writer and commentator, talking about housing policy in this country. So, Tasha, you probably saw the unemployment numbers this morning, right? That are up yet again. So more signs that we're headed in the wrong direction, economy-wise. What's the pivot we need? What direction do we need to go in?
Well, we need to understand what is driving this. Like why? And unemployment is now 6.6%, right? It was in August, and that was a slight increase from July. It was 6.4. The really disturbing numbers, though, are the fact that you have students who could not find work, extremely high, 16%, and also people who are not born here. This is the big one. 1 in 4 cannot find a job. And so that is, again, it's the promise of you will come here to Canada and
it's crazy.
You will,
it's crazy.
But the jobs aren't there. So the government has to look at the sectors. It's a sectoral issue, right? The idea is that, sectors like hospitality and construction, others depend on these workers. We need to fill those gaps. Okay, what's really happening there? What are people being admitted for? And where are their job offers coming for? And could those jobs go to someone who's from here? Is this just, that they have to do a deep dive into this. And they also, interest rates have dropped. This is good. That will help. But they also have to, look at just the way that the productivity gap is, why is the productivity gap so large? Like, what are people missing here? But they're not being productive and the economy is thus not generating enough wealth to create more jobs, right?
Yeah.
They want to do a commission now on productivity. No, I think, some of the stuff is kind of obvious too. And we also have to look at income supports too, because during the pandemic, that's partly why there was a labor shortage. People got used to getting money to sit at home.
And they're still used to it. We really haven't gotten out of that funk.
Right. And so what are those supports that they're getting? And why is that mindset there? That has to change too. And no one wants to do that, but we have to at some point because we can't keep going like this.
Tasha, listen, we're going to have to leave it there. I got to run, but I want to thank you for, it's been a while. I know I was on parental leave for a bit, but it's great to have you back on the show.
Well, it's very good. Enjoy the little one.
Absolutely. That's Tasha Kheiriddin right there in her latest in the National Post. The title is Trudeau Doesn't Want You to Own a Home. He Wants to Be Your Landlord.